The diner was quiet in the late morning, with only a few regular customers scattered at the booths, sipping coffee and reading newspapers. The smell of fresh pancakes and brewed coffee filled the air. The waitress moved swiftly between the tables, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups with a practiced ease. She had worked there for years, and everyone in town knew her as kind, polite, and hardworking. Her uniform was simple, a plain blouse and apron, but her smile made her glow more than any fancy dress could. It was a slow day, nothing out of the ordinary. The morning sun shone through the windows, highlighting the soft hum of conversation from the patrons. She was used to this rhythm, the gentle back and forth of orders, small talk, and the occasional joke. She enjoyed her work despite its challenges. There was a satisfaction in serving people, in making someone's day a little better with a warm meal and a friendly smile. Suddenly, the bell above the door rang loudly, and she looked up to see the sheriff step in. He was a man with a reputation that sent shivers down the spines of many townspeople. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that rarely showed a friendly expression. He carried himself with an air of authority that was more fearsome than reassuring. People whispered about his corruption and the way he used his badge to intimidate rather than protect. Even so, he was a figure of power in the town, and most people avoided crossing him. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had seen him before, but today, there was something different in his eyes. Something colder, sharper. He scanned the diner slowly, as if measuring everyone's worth, before finally resting his gaze on her. She forced a smile and approached him, trying to keep the interaction professional. "Good morning, Sheriff. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her voice calm but polite. He looked at her with a sneer, making her feel a chill run down her spine. "Coffee, black, and make it quick," he demanded. His tone was sharp, more commanding than conversational. She nodded, keeping her hands steady. She poured the coffee, careful not to spill, and set it in front of him with a gentle, "Here you go, sir. Anything else?" He waved a hand dismissively, his eyes scanning the diner as though daring someone to challenge him. The other patrons went silent, sensing the tension in the air. The usual warmth of the diner felt like it had been replaced by a heavy shadow. The waitress returned to the counter, her hands shaking slightly, but she kept moving as if nothing had happened. She had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged people like him. As she moved around, taking orders and refilling drinks, she noticed the sheriff watching her closely. Every gesture, every small movement seemed to irritate him. He muttered under his breath, and she could hear the anger in his low voice, though she couldn't make out the words. Other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing toward the sheriff but staying silent. No one wanted to be on his bad side. Despite the tension, she continued to work diligently. She refilled a man's coffee, cleared a plate of pancakes, and smiled warmly at a child who waved at her from a corner booth. It was her way of keeping some normalcy in a situation that felt anything but normal. She reminded herself that she had to stay calm and professional, no matter what. She couldn't let him see her fear. After a few minutes, the sheriff slammed his hand on the counter, making a loud thud that echoed through the diner. Her heart jumped, but she kept her composure. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. He glared at her, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, there's a problem," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I asked for black coffee, not whatever this is." He gestured toward the cup in front of him. "Do you even know how to do your job properly?" She forced a polite smile and nodded. "I'll fix it right away, sir," she replied, taking the cup carefully and pouring fresh coffee, making sure it was exactly how he wanted it. She placed it in front of him again, her hands steady. "Here you go, sir. I hope this is better." He took a sip and grunted, clearly dissatisfied but not saying anything further. The tension in the diner remained thick. The other customers avoided eye contact, pretending to be absorbed in their own conversations. The waitress felt a mixture of fear and anger, but she didn't let it show. She had learned to survive in moments like this by staying calm and composed. As she walked back to the counter, she noticed a man sitting in the corner, quietly observing the scene. He was calm, with a presence that seemed to command respect without a word. He didn't intervene, but his eyes followed the sheriff's every move. The waitress didn't recognize him, but something about his calmness was reassuring. It gave her a small sense of hope that maybe she wasn't entirely alone. The sheriff continued to sit, drinking his coffee and muttering under his breath. He occasionally slammed his hand on the counter or made sharp gestures, clearly trying to assert control over the situation. The waitress moved around him carefully, taking orders from other customers, keeping a professional demeanor despite the growing anxiety. Time seemed to stretch, each minute feeling longer than the last. The sheriff's presence was oppressive, his anger palpable. The waitress reminded herself to breathe slowly, to keep her movements steady, and to focus on her work. She couldn't let this man ruin her day, and she certainly couldn't let him intimidate her. She had survived difficult situations before, and she would survive this one too. A small group of regular customers tried to lighten the mood by joking quietly among themselves, but the sheriff's sharp gaze silenced them. The waitress felt a pang of sympathy for them. Everyone in the diner was trapped in this tense moment, unsure of how to react without angering the sheriff further. She wanted to reassure them, but she had to maintain her composure and focus on her duties. The sheriff's anger seemed to grow with each passing moment. He slammed his hand on the counter again, startling a couple who were having breakfast nearby. The waitress moved quickly to calm the situation, offering smiles and apologies, even though none of it was her fault. She knew that in moments like this, patience and professionalism were her best tools. She caught the eye of the man in the corner again. He gave her a small nod, as if acknowledging her courage. It was a subtle gesture, but it strengthened her resolve. She continued to move efficiently, clearing tables, refilling drinks, and attending to each customer with care. Her focus on others helped her manage her own fear. The sheriff finally finished his coffee and slammed the cup down, leaving a stain on the counter. He muttered something under his breath and stood up, casting a threatening glance around the diner. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself for whatever was about to happen next. She knew that this encounter was far from over and that she had to remain strong. As he walked toward the door, he stopped and looked back at her, his eyes filled with contempt. She held his gaze, refusing to show fear, and managed a calm nod. It was a small act of defiance, but it mattered. The sheriff left without another word, the bell above the door ringing loudly as he stepped outside. The diner slowly returned to normal. Customers whispered quietly among themselves, some expressing admiration for the waitress's composure. She took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the tension drain from her body. Despite the fear and anger she had felt, she had maintained her professionalism and dignity. The man in the corner finished his meal and stood, leaving without drawing attention to himself. She didn't know who he was, but she felt a quiet sense of gratitude for his presence. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people who could silently protect and support others. She returned to her work, serving food and coffee with a renewed sense of purpose. The morning had been challenging, but she had survived it with grace and strength. She reminded herself that this was only one day in a long life, and she would face whatever came next with the same courage and professionalism she had shown today. The diner buzzed quietly with conversation, the smell of food filling the air once more, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But the memory of the sheriff's anger lingered, a reminder of the resilience and strength she carried within her. The diner had returned to a fragile calm after the sheriff's brief departure, but the sense of tension lingered in the air like a shadow. Patrons whispered quietly among themselves, unsure whether to stay or leave, while the waitress tried to regain her focus on the simple rhythms of serving food and filling coffee cups. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was alert, remembering the cold glare the sheriff had left behind. She knew that people like him were unpredictable, and the calm could vanish at any moment. It wasn't long before the bell above the door rang again, louder this time, and she looked up to see the sheriff stepping back inside. His presence felt heavier now, his eyes sharper, filled with a dark energy that immediately tightened the air around her. He didn't even glance at the other patrons. All his attention was on her. The waitress swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. She reminded herself to stay composed, to act as if nothing could shake her. This was not just her job. It was a test of patience, resilience, and courage. "I asked for coffee," the sheriff said, his voice cutting through the quiet diner. "And this time make sure it's exactly right. No mistakes. Do you understand?" "Yes, Sheriff," she replied softly, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. She poured the coffee with care, making sure every step was precise. She had learned that mistakes could be dangerous in moments like this. Each movement had to be calm and exact, a shield against the storm of his temper. As she set the cup in front of him, her hands trembling slightly, he suddenly slammed his palm down on the counter. The cup rattled, sending a small splash of coffee onto the countertop. Her breath caught, and her stomach twisted in anxiety. The diner went silent, every eye fixed on the scene unfolding before them. She knew she had to act quickly, or things could get worse. "Is that how you serve a customer? A mess like this?" He spat, his voice growing louder. The words were sharp, cruel, and deliberate. Customers flinched, glancing away, unwilling to meet his gaze. Some started recording with their phones, their hands shaking slightly as they documented the unfolding drama. The waitress felt a wave of shame and anger, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to let him see her inner turmoil. The sheriff's patience had clearly run out. In a shocking and violent move, he struck her across the face with the back of his hand. The sound echoed through the diner, sharp and terrifying. Gasps escaped from the patrons, and the clatter of utensils was forgotten as everyone froze. The waitress stumbled slightly but did not fall. Her mind raced, heart pounding, a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief flooding through her. She touched her cheek, feeling the sting and the sudden heat of tears that threatened to escape. She blinked them back, forcing herself to stand tall. The sheriff glared at her, a cruel smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You think you can act all brave in front of me?" he sneered, his voice low and menacing. "No one stands up to me. Not in my town. Not ever." But he did not notice the man in the corner of the diner, quietly observing the scene with a steady, unwavering gaze. The retired Navy SEAL had been watching silently, analyzing the sheriff's every movement, calculating the risk, and preparing to intervene if necessary. He had seen this type of aggression before and knew it could escalate quickly. Without making a sound, he stood from his seat, moving closer with calm, measured steps. His presence was quiet, but it radiated authority, a force the sheriff had not accounted for. The waitress tried to speak, to explain, to plead, but her voice caught in her throat. Fear made words difficult, but she kept her composure, refusing to show weakness. She glanced briefly at the SEAL, who gave a small, reassuring nod. It was a silent signal, a promise that she wasn't alone and that help was near. The sheriff's anger grew, and he began pacing in front of her, muttering threats that were loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you're clever, acting all professional, hiding your fear? I can break anyone who stands in my way. Do you hear me? Anyone." His words were meant to intimidate, to crush her confidence. But she stood firm, shoulders squared, eyes focused on the ground for a moment, then back to his face. She refused to let him see the fear that was clawing at her inside. The SEAL finally stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. "That's enough," he said, his eyes locked on the sheriff. There was no anger, only steady authority. The sheriff froze, taken aback by the intervention. He had expected compliance, fear, and submission, but not this. The man wasn't confrontational, but the confidence and control in his posture made it clear that he would not allow further violence. The sheriff's sneer faltered slightly. He looked around, noticing for the first time that other patrons were recording on their phones, capturing every detail of his abusive behavior. The realization that his actions were being documented made him hesitate. He tried to regain control, puffing up his chest, but the SEAL's presence made him pause, reassess, and reconsider his next move. "Step back," the seal said calmly, moving just close enough to position himself between the waitress and the sheriff. "You don't need to do this. Walk away." The sheriff bristled, his pride wounded and his temper boiling. He looked at the waitress, then at the seal, trying to figure out who this man was and why he dared to challenge him. The diner remained silent, everyone waiting, holding their breath. The tension was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. For the first time that day, the sheriff hesitated. He hadn't expected intervention, hadn't expected someone to step in with authority that matched his own. The waitress felt a surge of relief but remained cautious. She knew the situation was still dangerous and that the sheriff's temper could explode again. Her hands rested lightly on the counter, steadying herself. She reminded herself that fear was a tool for the sheriff, and she refused to give him that advantage. Every movement was deliberate, calm, and professional. The sheriff took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the seal. He realized that he could not dominate this man, could not intimidate him as he did with others. The seal's calm, unshakable demeanor was a challenge he had not faced before. Finally, muttering under his breath, the sheriff turned toward the door, still glancing back at the waitress with a mix of anger and disbelief. The bell above the door rang loudly as he left, and the diner seemed to exhale collectively, the tension slowly dissipating. Patrons began to whisper among themselves, expressing quiet relief and admiration for the way the situation had been handled. Some offered small smiles and nods to the waitress, acknowledging her bravery and composure. The man in the corner quietly returned to his seat, finishing his meal with the same calm, unobtrusive presence he had maintained before. He didn't seek recognition or thanks, but the waitress felt a deep sense of gratitude for his timely intervention. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself as the adrenaline faded. She felt the sting on her cheek and the residual tension in her shoulders, but she also felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She had survived an act of blatant aggression with dignity, and someone had been there to protect her when she needed it most. She returned to her work, serving the remaining patrons with renewed focus, each movement deliberate and careful, yet filled with quiet strength. The rest of the morning passed slowly, with the memory of the confrontation lingering in everyone's minds. Patrons shared whispered conversations about what had happened, and the incident spread quickly through the small town. People admired her courage, and many felt a renewed sense of accountability, knowing that abuse of power could not go unchecked when others were willing to intervene. The waitress wiped down tables and refilled coffee cups, her movements steady, her mind processing the events she had just endured. She reflected on the unexpected presence of the seal and the quiet, unwavering support he had provided. It was a reminder that courage could manifest in many forms, both visible and hidden, and that standing against injustice was possible even in moments of fear. By the time the sheriff was fully out of sight, the diner had regained a semblance of calm. Patrons resumed their conversations, though many still glanced occasionally at the waitress with respect and concern. She continued to serve with grace, knowing that she had not only protected herself, but had also shown others the importance of standing strong in the face of intimidation. The day went on, but the events of that morning had left an indelible mark. The waitress knew that life in the town would continue, and she would return to her routine, but she also understood that she had experienced a pivotal moment, one that demonstrated resilience, courage, and the quiet power of intervention. The diner hummed with life once more, but the memory of the sheriff's aggression and the unexpected protection lingered, a powerful lesson in bravery and humanity. After the sheriff stormed out, the diner slowly began to breathe again. The quiet murmur of conversations returned, though the air was still heavy with the memory of what had just happened. The waitress leaned against the counter for a moment, closing her eyes and taking deep breaths. Her face still tingled from the strike, and the sting reminded her that some encounters left more than just emotional scars. Despite everything, she felt a growing sense of resolve. She had stood her ground, and someone had silently come to her aid. The sense of courage lingered like a small flame in her chest. Patrons whispered quietly, exchanging glances filled with a mix of admiration and concern. Many of them had lived in the town long enough to understand the sheriff's reputation, and they were well aware that few people had the courage to confront him, let alone withstand his aggression. Some of the regulars, usually quiet and reserved, approached her gently, asking if she was okay. She offered soft smiles and reassurances, though inside, a jumble of emotions swirled. Fear, anger, gratitude, and relief all fought for dominance, but she chose to focus on calm. The man in the corner, the one who had intervened, quietly returned to his seat. The waitress noticed him briefly, catching his eyes. He offered a small nod, a gesture of quiet support and reassurance. She didn't know his name, nor did she expect to. There was something comforting in his unobtrusive presence, a reminder that sometimes, help comes without fanfare, silently and effectively. She continued her work, pouring coffee, clearing tables, and serving food, each action deliberate and steady, keeping her mind from spiraling into fear or anxiety. News of the incident spread quickly throughout the town. People began discussing it in hushed tones at grocery stores, gas stations, and around the local community center. The story traveled faster than wildfire, carrying with it a mix of shock, outrage, and a growing sense of hope. In a town where fear often silenced people, this event ignited conversations about accountability and courage. Those who had quietly endured the sheriff's tyranny now felt that maybe, just maybe, someone could stand against him. Meanwhile, the waitress tried to regain some normalcy in her day. She continued taking orders, refilling drinks, and serving plates, all while mentally replaying the events in her mind. Each time the sheriff's face flashed before her eyes, she felt a jolt of anxiety, but she reminded herself that he had left and could not harm her further in that moment. The support from the seal and the witnessing patrons became her anchor, stabilizing her emotions. Her focus on work allowed her to maintain a sense of control, even when fear tried to creep back in. The seal, sensing that the immediate threat had passed, remained in the diner for a while longer, making sure that the sheriff did not return abruptly. He sat quietly, observing the surroundings with a calm vigilance that only someone trained to read tension and risk could maintain. His eyes scanned the room, noting each patron's reaction and ensuring that the waitress was not left alone in case the sheriff tried to re-enter. There was no need for words. His presence itself was a form of silent protection. The waitress felt a quiet gratitude, acknowledging his aid without speaking. She understood that his intervention had been decisive, yet he had allowed her to retain dignity and agency. As the day progressed, the sheriff's reputation in the town began to clash with reality. Rumors of the incident spread, some exaggerated, some accurate, but all contributing to a growing awareness that his behavior had limits. People who had long felt powerless began to feel that the sheriff's intimidation might not be absolute. The waitress, despite her initial fear, realized that her composure and courage had influenced others' perception. Her quiet strength became a subtle yet powerful example of standing up to abuse without aggression. Late in the afternoon, a few townspeople who had witnessed the event approached the waitress. They shared their observations, confirming the incident from multiple perspectives. Phones were passed around, showing shaky videos of the sheriff's actions, the strike, and the intervention by the seal. The waitress studied the footage, feeling a mix of vindication and discomfort. The visual evidence made her realize that this moment would not be easily forgotten or dismissed. It also made her aware of the larger implications. This was more than a personal encounter. It was a statement to the town about accountability. The seal quietly rose from his seat and approached the waitress, offering a reassuring smile. He spoke softly, ensuring that she felt supported but not overwhelmed. "You did well today," he said. "You stayed calm, professional, and brave. That matters more than you realize." His words were simple, yet their impact was profound. She nodded, a small smile forming despite the lingering tension. The validation was subtle, human, and deeply grounding. It reminded her that courage could be acknowledged in small, meaningful ways without fanfare. The waitress reflected on the sheriff's actions and her own responses. She realized that fear had been a natural reaction, but it did not define her. She had maintained her integrity, protected herself, and allowed someone to intervene without relinquishing her agency. The event became a lesson in resilience, showing that standing firm in the face of intimidation is a quiet form of strength. Her thoughts shifted from fear to determination, understanding that this incident could serve as a catalyst for change in the town. As evening approached, the diner gradually emptied, leaving the waitress with time to process the day. She wiped down tables methodically, her movements deliberate, each swipe a way of reclaiming her space and her sense of normalcy. The sting on her cheek was still present, a physical reminder of the confrontation, but it also became a symbol of endurance. She reflected on the reactions of the patrons, their whispers of admiration, and the seal's silent support. It all contributed to a growing awareness that even in moments of vulnerability, human connection and courage could provide strength. The town, meanwhile, began to buzz with discussions of accountability and justice. Conversations in shops, schools, and community gatherings reflected a subtle shift in perception. People began to question the sheriff's actions openly, discussing the incident without fear. The visual evidence captured on phones reinforced the narrative, making it harder for authorities or townspeople to ignore the reality of the encounter. The waitress, though she did not seek attention, became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating that professional composure and quiet courage could challenge even the most intimidating figures. The seal eventually left the diner as quietly as he had intervened, his presence unnoticed by many but deeply felt by the waitress. She watched him leave, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and humility. The day had tested her in ways she had not anticipated, and the support she had received reminded her that courage was often amplified by the unseen acts of others. She returned to her duties, serving the remaining patrons with a steady hand, her confidence subtly strengthened by the events that had unfolded. Throughout the evening, she reflected on the significance of standing up to abuse and intimidation. The sheriff's actions had exposed not only his aggression but also the limits of his power when confronted by calm authority and human resilience. She recognized that fear was natural but could be managed, and that moments of crisis could reveal both vulnerability and strength. The day had become more than a test of endurance. It had become a lesson in the quiet power of composure, courage, and human connection. By the time the diner closed, the waitress felt a sense of closure for the immediate events, though she knew the story was far from over. The sheriff's behavior had left a mark on her, the patrons, and the town, but it had also sparked reflection and potential change. She cleaned the counters, washed dishes, and prepared the diner for the next day, her mind filled with thoughts of resilience and hope. The sting on her cheek had faded slightly, replaced by a deeper understanding of her own strength. As she locked up and stepped outside, the cool evening air was a welcome relief. The town was quiet now, the sun setting in hues of orange and pink, casting a calm over the streets. She walked home slowly, reflecting on the day's events. Despite the fear, the aggression, and the tension, she felt a quiet pride in how she had handled the situation. She had not only survived an act of violence but had done so with dignity and professionalism. The lessons of courage, support, and resilience would stay with her, shaping how she faced challenges in the future. The incident at the diner became a story that would ripple through the town for days and weeks. Patrons discussed it, neighbors shared their observations, and the sheriff's reputation was quietly being challenged. The waitress, though she preferred to remain in the background, understood that her actions had meaning beyond herself. She had stood firm, maintained her dignity, and allowed justice in its quiet form to intervene. The day had transformed from one of routine work into a powerful narrative of courage, accountability, and human connection, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The day after the incident, the town was abuzz with whispers and speculation. The diner felt different, though it had reopened for its usual hours. Patrons trickled in cautiously, some curious to see the waitress who had endured such a shocking confrontation, others wanting to witness the atmosphere that had held so much tension the day before. The waitress moved about her tasks, pouring coffee, clearing tables, and serving breakfast with a steady hand. But her mind was alert, aware that the ripple effect of yesterday's event was far from over. People were talking quietly among themselves. Many had seen the videos recorded by other patrons, shaky as they were, but clear enough to show the sheriff's aggression. The footage circulated quickly, passing from phones to small gatherings, spreading not just within the diner but throughout the town. Conversations at the market, gas stations, and workplaces focused on what had happened, each retelling emphasizing the shocking act of violence and the unexpected intervention that prevented it from escalating further. The waitress was aware that she had become a symbol, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. She focused on her work, maintaining professionalism while quietly processing the attention she was receiving. By late morning, there was a knock on the diner's door. A group of local authorities entered, looking serious yet professional. They introduced themselves politely and explained that they were investigating the previous day's incident. The sheriff's behavior had raised complaints, and the evidence collected from patrons' videos was enough to initiate an official inquiry. The waitress nodded, answering questions calmly and providing details of what had occurred. Her recollection was clear, measured, and composed, emphasizing her professionalism and credibility. As the interview progressed, it became evident that the authorities were taking the situation seriously. They asked for statements clarifying details and ensuring that all angles were considered. Patrons who had witnessed the event were asked to provide accounts, and several willingly shared their recordings. The waitress felt a sense of relief knowing that her experience was being validated and that the authorities were committed to following through. The town's sense of accountability, long dormant due to fear, was slowly beginning to take shape. News of the investigation spread quickly. Conversations shifted from whispers to discussions of fairness and justice. People who had felt powerless under the sheriff's rule now found themselves talking about the importance of standing up to abuse. The waitress, while preferring to maintain a low profile, found herself quietly inspiring others. Her composure, courage, and professionalism in the face of aggression became a model for handling conflict with dignity. Townspeople began reflecting on the power dynamics that had long governed their lives, questioning the unchecked authority that had allowed such behavior to go unchallenged for so long. The sheriff, meanwhile, faced increasing scrutiny. Internal complaints, public pressure, and the clear evidence from videos made it impossible for him to dismiss the incident. He attempted to maintain his authority outwardly, but the awareness that his actions were being closely monitored and documented had altered the balance of power. Each public appearance, each interaction with the community, was now under careful observation. His unchecked dominance, once a defining characteristic of his role, was now being questioned and challenged openly. Throughout this time, the waitress continued to work diligently in the diner. She interacted with customers, shared quiet conversations with those who expressed concern or admiration, and maintained the atmosphere of her workplace. Despite the ongoing investigation and the attention she was receiving, she managed to preserve a sense of normalcy, balancing the demands of her role with the broader implications of the incident. Each coffee poured, each meal served, became a reminder of her resilience and her ability to navigate challenging circumstances. The seal who had intervened remained a quiet presence in the town. While he did not seek recognition or attention, the waitress occasionally saw him in passing, observing with the same calm vigilance he had demonstrated in the diner. His involvement had been critical in preventing further harm, but he allowed the narrative to focus on the collective actions of the community rather than personal heroics. This quiet approach reinforced the idea that courage often works best when it supports others without seeking acknowledgement. As the investigation progressed, the sheriff's actions were evaluated in the context of his role and authority. Evidence from the diner, combined with statements from witnesses, painted a clear picture of misconduct. The authorities emphasized accountability, reinforcing that the law applied to everyone, regardless of position or reputation. The waitress, while not directly involved in the formal legal processes, felt a sense of empowerment knowing that her testimony and the community's observations were contributing to a larger movement toward justice. Community members began to engage in discussions about broader issues, including abuse of power, respect, and personal responsibility. The incident at the diner became a catalyst for reflection and conversation. People shared stories of past encounters, discussed ways to support each other, and explored how to create a safer, more accountable environment. The waitress, though focused on her work, found herself quietly participating in these conversations, offering insights drawn from her experience and reinforcing the importance of calm, professional courage. As days passed, the town began to notice subtle changes. Patrons who had once avoided conflict now spoke more openly about injustices they had witnessed. Conversations at local gatherings included discussions about fairness, respect, and the responsibilities of authority figures. The diner, once a place of routine and simple meals, became a symbolic space where community members reflected on courage, dignity, and the power of standing up to abuse. The waitress continued her role with grace, embodying the principles that had guided her through the confrontation. The sheriff, facing mounting pressure and increasing public awareness of his actions, experienced a shift in his authority. While he maintained his official position, the scrutiny limited his ability to intimidate and control as he had in the past. Community members, emboldened by the incident and its aftermath, began to assert their rights and expectations more confidently. The balance of power in the town slowly began to shift, highlighting the impact of individual courage combined with collective support. The waitress reflected on the changes around her. She recognized that the incident had not only affected her but had created ripples throughout the town. Her professional composure, the intervention of the SEAL, and the community's response all contributed to a broader understanding of accountability. She felt a quiet pride in having navigated the situation with dignity, knowing that her actions had inspired reflection and conversation. Each day at the diner reinforced the lessons of resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up against abuse. By the end of the week, the investigation had made significant progress. Authorities reviewed the collected evidence, spoke with witnesses, and began formal proceedings to address the sheriff's behavior. The waitress continued her work, providing service with calm efficiency while remaining aware of the ongoing developments. The diner, a place of daily routine, had become a setting for a larger story about justice, courage, and the human capacity to challenge wrongdoing. The town's response highlighted the interconnectedness of individual and collective action. The courage displayed by the waitress, combined with the SEAL's intervention and the support of witnesses, demonstrated how ordinary actions could have extraordinary consequences. The investigation, while formal and procedural, also reflected the community's desire for accountability and fairness. Each conversation, each shared observation, contributed to a culture of vigilance and responsibility. As the week drew to a close, the waitress reflected on the journey from the initial confrontation to the ongoing investigation. She realized that moments of fear and uncertainty could reveal profound strength, and that standing firm in the face of aggression was not just about self-preservation, but about reinforcing the values of dignity and respect. The incident had transformed not only her own understanding of courage, but also the town's approach to authority and accountability. Even as the sheriff faced scrutiny, the community's attention remained focused on broader principles. Conversations about fairness, safety, and respect became more common, and the diner remained a quiet hub for reflection and dialogue. The waitress, while focused on her work, understood that her role had expanded beyond serving food. She had become part of a narrative that reinforced resilience, human connection, and the importance of standing up to injustice. The events at the diner, the intervention, and the investigation had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond a single day. The town began to see the value in observing, documenting, and addressing abuse of power. The waitress, having navigated the most intense moments with composure, emerged as a symbol of calm courage and professional integrity. Her experience underscored the impact of individual action, the importance of support from others, and the way communities could respond when injustice is confronted thoughtfully and firmly. By the time the weekend arrived, the diner had settled into its usual rhythm, yet the memory of the confrontation remained present. Patrons continued to share conversations about accountability, and the investigation into the sheriff's behavior progressed steadily. The waitress, reflecting on the week's events, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had endured a moment of aggression with dignity, witnessed the power of intervention, and seen the community begin to embrace principles of accountability and justice. The experience reinforced her belief in resilience, courage, and the human capacity to act rightly even in the face of intimidation and fear. Weeks had passed since the confrontation in the diner, and life had begun to settle back into a slower rhythm, though the memory of that day remained vivid for many. The waitress continued her work, moving gracefully between tables, pouring coffee, and serving meals with the same dedication and care as always. Yet beneath the ordinary tasks, a quiet transformation had taken place. She carried herself with a confidence born of surviving a moment of aggression and witnessing the power of human support and justice. The investigation into the sheriff's behavior had progressed steadily. Evidence collected from patrons, combined with eyewitness accounts and video footage, painted a clear picture of misconduct. The authorities moved with determination, ensuring that the sheriff could not rely on intimidation or fear to influence the process. Townspeople followed the developments closely, discussing them in quiet corners of shops and gathering places. The narrative was no longer just about a single act of violence. It had become a story about accountability, fairness, and courage. One morning, the waitress arrived at the diner to find several community members waiting. They approached her gently, offering thanks and support for the calm bravery she had displayed. Many shared stories of times they had felt powerless in the past, and how her composure had inspired them to consider standing up against intimidation themselves. The waitress listened, nodding quietly, feeling a deep sense of connection to the community. She realized that her actions had ripple effects far beyond the moment of conflict, influencing attitudes and empowering others. The sheriff, aware that his behavior had been documented and scrutinized, began to feel the consequences of his actions. He faced suspension from his role and was called to answer for the assault formally. The authority he had once wielded unchecked was now constrained by the law, evidence, and public scrutiny. For the first time, the town saw that even those in positions of power were accountable for their actions. Conversations about leadership, respect, and integrity became more common, and the town began to reflect on what it meant to truly serve a community. Despite the ongoing developments, the diner returned to a sense of normalcy. Patrons resumed their meals, conversations humbly returning to everyday matters. Yet, for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the atmosphere carried an undercurrent of respect and awareness. The waitress moved through the space with grace, greeting customers and quietly acknowledging their gestures of admiration. She knew that her professional composure had been noticed, and while she did not seek praise, she understood the impact it had on the morale of the town. The seal who had intervened returned to the diner briefly, unseen by most, to ensure that the situation remained safe. He offered the waitress a quiet smile and a nod, acknowledging her resilience without drawing attention to himself. This silent gesture reinforced the lesson that courage often works best when it uplifts others quietly and effectively. The waitress felt a sense of gratitude and humility, recognizing that the moment had been shaped not just by her own actions, but also by those who had stepped in to protect and support her. As the sheriff faced formal proceedings, the community watched attentively. Town meetings discussed not only the specific incident but also broader issues of responsibility and fairness. Residents shared ideas about preventing abuse of power and ensuring that authority figures were held accountable. The waitress, though focused on her work, engaged in these discussions with thoughtful contributions, emphasizing the importance of professional composure, courage, and collective vigilance. Through the following weeks, the legal process moved forward, and the sheriff's suspension became permanent. Internal reforms were introduced in the local authorities, ensuring better oversight and accountability. The community's sense of justice was strengthened, and individuals who had long felt powerless began to engage more actively in civic matters. The waitress's role, though seemingly ordinary in her daily tasks, became emblematic of resilience and moral fortitude. Her ability to remain calm, professional, and courageous in the face of aggression had inspired tangible change. Throughout this period, the diner remained a quiet hub of reflection and conversation. Patrons came not only for meals, but also to discuss the town's evolving sense of justice and community values. Stories of courage, accountability, and human support were shared, reinforcing the lessons that had emerged from the incident. The waitress moved through her duties with renewed confidence, aware that her actions had created a ripple effect that strengthened the town's ethical framework. One afternoon, a small gathering of townspeople came together in the diner to express their gratitude formally. They spoke of the courage displayed, the importance of standing firm against intimidation, and the impact of the SEAL's intervention. The waitress listened quietly, humbled by their recognition. She understood that this acknowledgement was not just for her own bravery, but also for the broader lesson that courage combined with support could create meaningful change. As the day drew to a close, the waitress reflected on the journey from the initial confrontation to the ongoing transformation within the community. She considered the lessons learned, that fear is natural but can be managed, that courage often manifests in quiet composure, and that human connection and intervention can prevent harm and promote justice. Each meal she served, each coffee she poured, became a reminder of the strength she carried and the resilience she had witnessed in others. The SEAL, having ensured that the immediate danger had passed, returned to his own life quietly, leaving the narrative of courage and accountability to be carried forward by those who had experienced it firsthand. The waitress, carrying the memory of his intervention, continued her work with the same professionalism, understanding that the moment had reinforced her sense of purpose and responsibility. The town, inspired by the events at the diner, began to embrace a culture of accountability. Conversations about fairness, respect, and leadership became more common in public and private spaces. The sheriff's removal from his position served as a tangible reminder that authority comes with responsibility, and that abuse of power is not acceptable. The community learned that even in small towns, acts of courage and intervention could create meaningful change, influencing behavior and attitudes for the better. The waitress, reflecting on her experience, realized that the confrontation had transformed her understanding of her own strength. She had faced fear, endured aggression, and remained professional throughout the ordeal. She had witnessed human support, experienced the power of intervention, and seen the broader impact of her actions on her community. This understanding became a guiding principle for her, shaping how she approached challenges and interacted with others in both personal and professional contexts. Over time, the diner became more than a place for meals. It became a symbol of resilience and courage. Patrons shared stories of the incident, discussing how ordinary individuals could affect change through composure, courage, and collective action. The waitress, while maintaining her humble approach to her work, became a living example of these principles. Her actions had demonstrated that bravery is not always loud or confrontational. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and rooted in integrity. As the sun set over the town, the waitress closed the diner for the day, locking the doors and taking a moment to breathe. The air was calm, and the streets were peaceful. She thought about the journey from fear to courage, from confrontation to accountability, and from isolation to community support. The events at the diner had left an indelible mark on her, the patrons, and the town itself. They had shown that justice could prevail, that human intervention could prevent harm, and that resilience could inspire others. Walking home, the waitress reflected on the lessons that would stay with her forever. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Professionalism and composure can protect and empower individuals in moments of crisis. Support, whether visible or quiet, has the power to change outcomes and strengthen communities. The incident at the diner had been a turning point, not only in her own life but in the lives of those around her. By the time she reached her doorstep, the town had begun to heal and adjust to its new awareness of justice and accountability. The sheriff's removal, the ongoing conversations about respect and fairness, and the collective reflection of the community created a foundation for lasting change. The waitress, having navigated the events with dignity, remained a symbol of quiet courage, professional integrity, and the power of human support. That night, as she settled into bed, she felt a profound sense of closure and fulfillment. The confrontation, the intervention, the investigation, and the community's response had all contributed to a story of resilience, justice, and human connection. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she had gained confidence in her ability to face them with strength and integrity. The events at the diner had transformed a simple workplace into a space of courage, reflection, and growth, leaving a lasting impact on the town and all who had witnessed it.